Anybody come from the Northeast? Show of hands. Yeah. I flew from Dallas to New York Sunday. I was meeting with a bunch of media, and I was actually speaking at the a Privacy Day panel on Tuesday. So I get there Sunday afternoon, and weather's okay. It's 40-ish. It's actually quite balmy. And wake up the next day. Next thing you know, everything is being canceled. I actually have my first meeting is with CNN Money. I go to that meeting, and as we're having breakfast, we're looking outside, and it is just ungodly. So, I call my assistant and said, "Get me on the first flight out of here." As fate would have it, I got on a flight at 2 o'clock. As I'm looking out the windows of the plane, I'm thinking, there's no way they're going to let this plane take off. It's just, you can't see 10 feet from the plane. The snow is accumulating on the tarmac, and I said, I'm going to be stuck here for a week. So, crap. But plane took off. I made it here. Thank God. What a great couple days it's been. When you think about what I could have been enduring up in New York, and I think what I've had a chance to enjoy these past couple days, it's quite significant. So, the premise I want to talk through today is the notion that, there's a belief that security will be the gating factor between the ultimate adoption of IoT, both from a wearables perspective, the connected home. Obviously, there's lots of industrial uses, so a lot of my presentation is tied specifically to what's going on around wearables, but a lot of it actually applies to other things as well. So with that, let's get started. Keep this in mind as we go through the presentation. It's all about motive, right? When you think about why bad actors and nefarious people do what they do, is because there's a motive, right? If you can garner the health credentials of a consumer, it's worth 10 times that of a credit card on the open market. Today, a credit card is worth about $1. If you can get somebody's health credentials, it's worth 10 or more. Actually, in some cases, it's worth 20 times. And you might ask why. Well, in our space, when something gets hacked up, be it a retailer or whatever, credit card companies have great fraud detection tools, and they can go back and say, okay, over the course of this period when the deed took place, here are all the credit cards that had transacted here. Let's go ahead and cancel those cards and get on with it. So the lifespan of that credit card is very small. With healthcare credentials, when you have stuff like HIPAA and other regulatory things that affect the ability to disclose that type of information, it's harder. Right? It's harder for insurance companies to know that something bad is going on. It's harder for consumers to know that perhaps somebody is using their healthcare credentials to get medicines or other things fraudulently and then selling those on the black market. So you keep this in mind as we go through this, that the value of the data on that device is 10 times what a credit card is worth today. So what's being collected? You walk around. By the way, I'm a big fan. I wear my own fitness monitor. So obviously I'm a big fan of wearables in general, but I also am very conscious of what that means. So when we look at the type of data that can be collected, you have spatial data. If you're using Google Glass, you can see videos, the time, the location, things of that nature. So spatial data is probably one of the most commonly collected pieces of information. Physical activity. Are you walking? Are you running? Are you sitting? Are you standing? Are you sleeping? Are you doing all those sorts of things? That type of data is being collected. Physiological statistics, pH balance, menstrual cycles, all these sorts of things can all be monitored by these devices. Consumption. How many calories did you consume? How much alcohol did you consume? Did you smoke a cigarette? All that sort of information can be collected as part of the data that's being generated through these devices. Medical symptoms. Are you feeling pain today? Do you have a headache? Is your body not kind of running in an optimal state? I actually have hypertension. I would love to think that my doctor has unfettered access to my blood pressure at any given time. Now, in my case, I would like to make sure that how the data is being transmitted, exactly what's being transmitted, is something that I get to control and manage. But to me, that is something that has high value and allows me to better use this data and have my doctor better use this data in such a way that we hopefully can all benefit. Your bodily functions, your pH levels, all that sorts of stuff that's being collected. And mental health. Are you sad? Are you happy? Are you whatever. I know in my fitness band, they actually have this thing that comes up. It's a little iconic character that says, "Are you happy today? Are you sad today? What's your mood like?" All that stuff is being collected, and all this stuff is being transmitted someplace. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But what's the risk of this type of data? Well, there's several things that come to mind. First is obviously identity theft or fraud. The more data that's being collected and transmitted, the more likely something bad can happen where somebody's using that information maliciously. Insurance fraud, we talked about that a little bit ago. Again, remember the 10x, the motive, right? It's by the way, our industry, if you look at the cyber activity over the past couple of years, it's estimated to be worth between $300 billion and $1 trillion. So that's the number. That's the number that drives cyber criminals, drives activities to go make this a worthwhile business venture. You can use it for stalking. I mean, the more data that's collected, especially when you're looking at data as far as where somebody is and what they're doing, if you know that somebody has left their home because you can track them, that affords you the opportunity to go into their home and do something malicious. Obviously, extortion and exploitation. A good example of this is there was what we refer to as a rat infection a couple years ago, which targeted Miss Teen USA. A rat is a remote access Trojan. It basically took control over camera, and then the blackmailer basically said, "Hey, if you don't, either give me more shots of inappropriate material, I'm going to post all this stuff to the internet." So this is a big part of some of the issues, especially when you're talking about wearables such as Google Glasses or something like that, which again collects a lot of spatial information. Things like this become very relevant. And then robbery. I mean, you can use this data to basically steal things from consumers or businesses. It's extremely valuable, as we mentioned before. This is arguably a hypergrowth market. If you look at the major trend lines, the different things that are being bought today, everything from medical devices, I believe that the Apple Watch will be a key driver in driving watch technology this year. It's going to be that hypergrowth accelerator. Obviously, there's going to continue to be a lot of growth around fitness bands. The one thing that I'm probably a little bit suspect on this particular chart is what the growth around smart glasses looks like. Google, if you don't know, has discontinued Google Glasses, so that has kind of a nebulous future to me. But nonetheless, when you look at the mechanics of the market, again, this is what piques a hacker's attention. Knowing that you get critical mass, you get massive adoption, and you have an expanding attack surface is the things that a hacker looks for when they start doing their wares. A good example, when you look at the connected self, you look at the connected home, you look at the connected car. A car today has about 100 million lines of code. It has several attack surfaces, GPS, radio, cell, you name it. And those attack surfaces are wide open to people with malicious intent, right? One of the things we've been exploring is actually hacking up a car. Tesla, a couple months ago, actually hired a couple hackers to come in and demonstrate different ways that they could break into their cars and actually do something disruptive to those vehicles. So again, if you look at the attack surfaces and you look at what's going on in our space, this is an area that hackers look at. They say, well, if we're seeing a lot more smartwatches and we're seeing a lot more the wearables and all these other things, it's important that I figure out where I can attack those different devices and collect that information and do something bad. So let me take you down a little bit of memory lane. Our industry was kind of built on the back of Microsoft. Microsoft back in the day was really keen on how do we go grab market share, right? How do we go make sure that we're having as many people as possible using our operating system and using that stuff that we have today. If you look at our Malware Zoo, and that's that thing that we use to kind of track what's going on in our space, we now have over 50 million malware samples in that zoo. We are finding over 307 new malware every minute of every day, or that's about 5 per second. So look at the velocity of that. Now, arguably, roughly 80% of that is basically refactoring and repurposing existing malware, but about 20% is new stuff that that's really just coming on the horizon, 0 days and stuff like that. So again, if you look back, Microsoft was really the big catalyst that drove a lot of, of what the bad actors do today. Fast forward to kind of the now zone is Android. If you look at that Malware Zoo, about 5 million of those samples are Android, right? Same basic notion. Android basically it's open source code. Their stores are much more open. They have been exploited to death, but it's for the right reason. If I understand it correctly, Android has about 80% share of the mobile device market this year, even despite Apple's earnings and the hypergrowth they've seen in places like China and stuff like that. Android is still the operating system of choice when it comes to general consumer use. It has been the best facilitator for malware. And then I suspect that IoT is the next big thing. And I'm going to explain why in a couple of minutes, but the net of it is that those companies who are manufacturing IoT devices are foregoing stuff like security controls and things of that nature in order to get time to market and convenience. Those are the two big factors that are really driving the behaviors of the manufacturers. So they say, well, we'll go get to security at some point. We'll just, maybe version 2, version 3 is when we'll start thinking about security. And I would argue that that's probably going to be too late, because the behaviors we see in consumers and being able to apply any type of security patches or updates is not very good. HP recently did a study, and they looked at the top 10 devices deployed in the home. Things like smart thermostats and smart TVs and stuff like that. On average, each of those devices had 25 vulnerabilities. 25. And this is simple stuff. It was not having an encrypted communications channel. It was sending stuff in clear text. It was not requiring a reset of the password, not requiring a complex password. The stuff that any security practitioner would have said, guys, not only is this simple to do, we need to do this, but again, the challenge is that the device manufacturers around IoT today are looking at this more at, hey, what do we do to make that device so simple to use that that's really the driving factor. So, God, if we have to make that poor consumer do a password reset, that's going to confuse them. We don't want to do that, so let's not just do that. Let's go ahead and use default password. Let's call it password so it's simple, and let's see what happens. If any of you are familiar with a company called Foscam, about the middle of last year, there's a big news cycle, and basically they had an IP-connected baby monitor, and basically they were using open IP, and they didn't require any password reset, so that again, anybody in this room could have done this easily. Go to the IP address. You could take control of that camera. You could reorient the camera. You could talk to the child that it was monitoring. There were so many things you could do with this device. So again, the challenge we face today is that these device manufacturers are just not giving this the kind of thought that they need to really make sure that we're providing the best, most secure environments. I want to take just a moment and kind of step you through how the data flows. So, you have your wearable. In most cases, that connects to your smartphone. That data is kind of stored there. It goes to a cloud service someplace. They kind of synthesize the data, send it back to your smart device to make sure everything is good and synced up, and then your smartphone takes it back to your wearable. From my perspective, or from a security industry perspective, every point along this area could be hacked up. Now, arguably, some of these hacks are harder than others. For example, to do a man-in-the-middle attack against a Bluetooth device connected to your phone is a challenge, right? You need to be able to get in a session when it's real, when it's happening. You have to be able to collect the information before anything bad happens. And, I could spend a lot of time talking about, how to properly secure the communications channels and the servers that all this data is residing on. But what I really want to focus on, I want to draw your attention to, is what I think the weakest link is, which is the mobile device, right? If you take a look, I'm going to step you through some of the behaviors we're seeing today from consumers and why I think that the smartphone is the weak link and what's really going to be the attack vector of choice when malicious things start to happen, or as they continue to happen, rather. Today, if you look to your left and your right, one of the three of you don't have a PIN-protected smartphone. right? So if you happen to leave that phone on your chair when you walk out of here and somebody picks it up, they, in essence, have unfettered access to your data, right? And I know that on my phone, I have my E-Trade account, I have my Charles Schwab account, I have my bank account, I have very sensitive information about my company and what's going on there. So that would be a very damaging thing for me. And actually, a couple years ago, we did a study, and we asked consumers, well, what's the value of that data on there? And the global number, it was I think we surveyed 5,000 people around the world, if I'm not mistaken. The value of the data on that device was $36,000. So I find it very ironic that a consumer would say, well, geez, this stuff is really valuable to me, but I don't think I need to pin protect that phone. Another thing is that only 22% of people install software that can find a phone when it's lost or stolen. Every device has this ability today, right? You have the ability to locate and lock that device. Only 22% actually use that today. Only 14% install any type of security software. And, one of the challenges here is that most of the security software today does more than just scan for malware. It's looking at app permissions. For example, right now, if you download a flashlight app that wants to get access to your contact list and your phone details and stuff like that, probably something wrong going there. We're seeing a really bad behavior by game writers. The game writers today are basically taking every single permission they can and open them up. So the malware writers today, instead of focusing on the operating system level and trying to get access there, they're just pulling the data from the apps. The apps are collecting all the data. How do I pull that data out and just send it to wherever I want? So things like that. Most of the security software will scan for app permissions. And most of the apps today will actually allow you to know whether or not you're connecting to a bad Wi-Fi. Right? If you're going to an airport or a coffee shop and you connect to a Wi-Fi that is being ARP spoofed, bad things are going to happen. It's going to happen. Only 8% install software that can actually erase the phone. I have the personal belief that we desperately need a kill switch. There are some companies that are really driving this agenda aggressively. LG comes to mind. I know Apple's having some discussions, but I would rather know that I could brick my iPhone and lose that $700 investment instead of deal with the consequences of somebody getting access to that device and doing something malicious. And then finally, only 7% use any meaningful security on the device beyond, including encrypting the device. Again, so this, from my perspective, is some of the things that we need to look at as we start understanding what's going on in the ecosystem and what we can be doing to really make some changes to behaviors and thinking about this environment. So kind of expanding on that a little bit, the FCC reported that roughly 40% of robberies include the theft of a mobile device. So somebody's breaking into your office, breaking into your car, breaking into your home. Chances are they're trying to find a mobile device. Now, arguably, in most cases, they're going to try to jailbreak or root that phone and try to sell it on the gray market. But they're getting smart. They're thinking, hold on, instead of me just rooting this phone, let me see what I can get off here. And what kind of data exists, what kind of access it gives me. In my phone, if you were to take my phone and I didn't have security on it, you could literally open my front door. I use this product called Kivo, which is a technology which allows me to touch my door and open it when I have my phone in my pocket. So again, having that type of knowledge, and the cyber criminal knows this. They know how these usages are taking place, and they know what to do to really make it difficult for you as a user. And actually, I think the Consumer Reports said that there were 4 million lost phones last year that were never recovered. 4 million. So what's another way that bad things can happen? Well, several months ago, actually last year, the author of Flappy Bird took his game off the Google Store. He feared that people would become addicted to it. And actually, a couple months ago, we had these forums called our executive leadership team, and I asked, my peers, well, who's played Flappy Bird? And I was surprised that almost 50% have played it. So I was like, wow, I guess it's more addictive than I thought. But anyway, so when the author took down the product, The next thing you know, we see an explosion of Flappy Bird clones. I mean, just all sorts of new apps. 80% of those had malware in them. 80%. And, some of it's kind of, I don't want to say benign, but it's less destructive malware from, making calls, sending SMSs, and things like that. But there was certain malware that actually could root the phone and take total control of the device, and the user wasn't any wiser to it. So again, when we talk about the fact that you have all this data flowing, all the spatial data, the sensitive information about you as an individual is flowing to this smartphone, the ability to extract the information off that phone, the ability to do something nefarious with that information is at the very root of what we need to go solve for. So what do we do? What options do we as consumers need to consider as we go and embrace this? Because what I don't want you to do is leave here thinking that, oh my God, I'm going to go back to a flip phone, a feature phone, and I'm not going to get wearables, and I'm going to be all paranoid. That's not what we're advocating. There are some simple things that we can do as consumers and as an industry to make this work for everybody. You want to do your homework. I probably wouldn't buy a Foscam camera. Just saying, right? It's probably something that it's probably not going to be on my short list of what I'm going to do. Change your default passwords. If you have the chance to change the password either on your wearable device or something connected to your smartphone, change it. Make it complex. Use a password manager. They're free. Go get one free. Turn Bluetooth off if you're not using the device. This is going to do two things. First of all, it's going to prevent anything bad from happening from that Bluetooth connection, from a man-in-the-middle attack or other types of things that could happen to that device. But it's also going to save battery life. And ultimately, I know I spend most of my day closely monitoring how much battery I have left and how close I am to an outlet so I can get my device recharged. Limit the amount of information you send. They're going to ask for it all. They're going to want you to share every piece of information you have and send it to wherever it goes. Be selective. Right? You don't have to send all the information. You can say, I really don't want you to know where I am right now. I really don't want you to know, that I have a headache. I don't want you to know I just had a beer. Right? Be careful when you do social sharing. I think this is especially true with millennials. If I look at my children, they have no issue sending every bit of information they have and putting it on Facebook. Why? I don't want my peeps on Facebook to know what's going on in my personal life to that level. I want to be able to selectively share what information that I think they would find interesting, but not give so much information away to give someone the opportunity to attack me directly. And then read and understand privacy policies. I would imagine if I had a show of hands that probably 90+% of you would say, I really don't read those privacy policies. I just hit agree and go on. It's all about getting the bits on there. I get the bits on there. I get to start using the software. Life is good. Well, perhaps not. Mobile devices. Again, mobile devices being the weakest link is the area that I think we need to spend the most time and attention on, trying to make sure that we're coming up with solutions that will allow the consumer to be as safe as possible. Pin protect the phone, right? 60% of you don't do that today. I'm sorry, 3% don't. Simple, right? Use biometrics. I would argue that our space defined today with consumers is really antivirus on a PC. When you ask a consumer what is security, they're going to say, well, that's the antivirus on my PC. I would argue that 5 years from now, there's going to be a foundational shift in how consumers perceive security, and that is going to be tied to security is that thing that allows me to authenticate to my device and go downstream and authenticate to every service that I want to go access, and I don't have to do a thing. I don't have to put a password in. I don't have to do anything except be with that device, and that's going to be good enough, and the security is going to be good enough to let me do that. But that's coming. Trust me, 5 years from now, that's going to be a defining moment or a tipping point in our space. We talked about permissions before. If you choose not to use an app that will warn you that you're downloading an app that takes way too many permissions, then just when you get that alert on your phone when you're downloading the app and it looks like it's asking for access to a bunch of things that it shouldn't, don't do it. Apply patches and updates. Apple a couple days came out with with a plethora of fixes across both the Mac OS and the iOS on the phone. So again, without fail, these are almost always a lot of security fixes and patches. For example, in the last fix from Apple, it included a fix for a piece of malware called Thunderstrike. Turn on the locate and lock capability. Come on, it's free. Just do it. Turn off non-essential antennas. This is important because you don't need to have Wi-Fi and you don't need to have Bluetooth on. You don't need to have all these antennas broadcasting GPS. They're going to drain your battery, and they're going to give those with malicious intent the ability to do something that you don't want them to do. Use security software. Use full device encryption if it's available. There's some devices that's just not an option on right now. And then stick to trusted app stores. There was and this was a really interesting thing to us. Last year, there was a Samsung clone that came out out of a Chinese manufacturer, and it actually had malware built into the firmware. That's one of those security things you just can't solve for because you don't expect it. But nonetheless, that makes us think, well, the reason this was relevant is because what it would do is it would redirect you to this fake Google Play Store, and the next thing you know, you give them the credit card information, you're giving all this other information, and bad things are happening. So again, make sure you go into trusted stores and using the different features available to you to make sure that you're getting apps that will do what they intend to do and not do too much. The cloud service. Make sure you're using encrypted communications channels. Simple stuff. Use multi-factor authentication. When you think about the notion of username password, I can list for you the top 10 passwords from every major breach for the past 5 years. Why? Because they don't change. The top 10, I'm not going to do them all, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, password 1. Literally, there's 10 passwords. Every time there's a breach, they're always the same. Only collect the data. Again, this is talking to the service provider. Only collect the data that you need to deliver the service. Don't be asking that consumer to give you data that you don't need to render that service because they're going to give it to you. That's just the way we are as consumers. We don't give a lot of thought to it. They must want this, so let's give it to them. So, again, make sure you do that. Require strong passwords. Getting to the point where we're using multi-factor authentication is going to take a while because it's a rather new initiative in the space. But if I'm a cloud service provider, I want to be driving this home. Listen, you need to have at least 8 characters, at least one capital, at least one number, one other type of character that's not going to be easily distinguishable. Use secure system management. There are tomes of articles about how to make sure that you're implementing secure system management on your cloud service. And follow best practices for password handling. I think it was a year and a half ago, one of the big social media sites got hacked up, and they didn't have salted passwords. And salting is just basically a means of taking an encrypted password and hashing it rather, to make it even more complex. And we were stunned as a security space that such an evolved social media site would not have required, or was not using salted passwords. The ecosystem, and this is what I would encourage you to really take away. We need to build security from the start. There are simple things that we can be doing today that says, if you do these 5 or 7 things, you're going to save yourself a lot of embarrassment should something go bad. You're going to save your consumers a lot of headaches if something bad happens to them. Let's do the simple things. Let's start there, and then we'll see where that goes. And then make sure that your privacy and security policies are well understood and adhered to. Most of the litigation we see in our space today is tied to somebody making a claim that, oh yeah, we're using 256-bit encryption, NSA approved, blah, 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 and they use no encryption. So if you say you're doing something about security or privacy, you damn well better make sure you're actually doing it, because that's when bad stuff really starts to happen. And by the way, every one of those cases, the company lost because they made a claim that was not substantiated. All right, I wanted to just spend a moment talking about the ultimate wearable hack. 2 years ago, at our Focus event in Las Vegas, where we bring all of our customers in and share with them some of the things we're exploring, we actually went to Radio Shack and bought a directional antenna, and we demonstrated how we could use that antenna with some software developed to actually hack an insulin pump. And it wasn't just, was the device there? We could turn the device on, we could turn the device off, we could change the dosages. So we could take total control of that insulin pump, and the consumer would have no idea what's going on. That's the ultimate hack, right? I mean, it would suck really bad if somebody, found out what my weight is or my height or stuff like that, where I am. It's a very, very different game when you talk about the notion of attacking a wearable like that and the kind of consequences that can have.